All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of ICU. We are gonna talk about gut health again, and I promise it's not gonna be boring because we've already done it, but we're gonna give you a fresh perspective. We're gonna talk about new topics, and to do that, I have a gut health dietitian with me. Her name is Leigh Merotto. So welcome to the show, Leigh.
Hey, Callie, it's nice to be here, joining you from the other side of North America.
Yes, you are from Toronto.
Yes, Toronto, Ontario in Canada.
I still don't understand Canada's geography, but I try my best. I have a lot of clients in Canada and I still don't understand it.
It's okay. There's
Yeah.
less to learn than the States, though.
They don't teach us. I mean, at least I was not taught about Canada. Like it was just Canada is this one big blob that's connected to us. I didn't realize that it was broken up into different provinces, is what you call them, right?
Territories. We have provinces and then we have 3 territories.
Well. Okay. Do you want to hear something really embarrassing? I, until like 3 years ago, thought that Alaska was an island. I didn't know that it was connected. It's connected to Canada, right?
I think so. I'm not even sure either.
Because when they teach us about the United States, and then they don't have Canada on the map, so it's like Alaska's just floating like Hawaii is, and it's like
completely separated.
It's not an island if anybody else was under that impression.
Yeah. We've cleared that up.
Oh, glad we cleared that up. Okay, so let's hear more about you. Can you tell the audience a little background, how you got into gut health, etc.?
Yeah, so I run a full-time online business, private practice, focused specifically. I work with clients with IBS, SIBO, and persistent gut issues to help empower them to find and address the cause of their symptoms so that they can live their best life, support their fitness, and have optimal wellness. So I do mainly like one-on-one coaching, but I also have some like digital resources, courses, menu plans to help people get started as well. I've been doing this for coming up on 5 years now, about 4.5 years since I started my practice. I did start when I finished my master's. I did a master's in health science at Toronto Metropolitan University. Got it started slowly. I was actually working when I finished school as an inpatient clinical dietitian at like a mental health hospital. So helping clients with like more so schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and that type of stuff. And then I realized that I really loved private practice. So I wanted to take it full time, and I've been full time for about three years now. The connection to IBS is really just from my own experience. Like when I started to get into nutrition and health, more so in like high school, I too was experiencing like sort of a lot of symptoms, typical IBS symptoms, more so regularity, a lot of bloating. And I wasn't really sure what was causing sort of the issues. And I kind of, when I first started, I got into a little bit of more of the like sort of like trends in a sense with diet, and I kind of wanted to become more of like a holistic nutritionist because I was into that like overall sort of picture of things, but I was just doing like, I would say just more like kind of trendy stuff. So I tried like vegan, paleo, keto, like all the different like crazy diets, and just like following a lot of stuff online. But then I decided to go to school for nutrition, did a Bachelor of Applied Science in Nutrition, learned what a dietitian was and how to actually use like evidence-based information to help our health. So that's when I started like doing more research into what actually could help. And then I ended up supporting my own issues and finding that freedom. And then I started working with IBS clients when I became a dietitian, and I really loved it. Like I find that they're so motivated. They really want to like figure out what's going on, and they're very like committed to the process and the journey as well. So it's just been, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how similar a lot of our stories are as registered dietitians, like how we have a personal connection to what we specialize in. We tried all the things, we did the fad diets, we kind of were grasping at straws, and then we found nutrition, and we ended up becoming dietitians. And figured out how to manage our conditions through diet and other lifestyle changes, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
it's just so interesting to me. I love that for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's good to know too. Like, I think clients like to know that also we have that like personal connection, and we have also tried or at least explored the things that we're recommending as well. Like, we're not just coming into it just telling them to do something that maybe we've never explored. Not to say that you've tried everything that you recommend to your clients, but at least you have some sort of connection.
Yeah.
We feel, yeah.
Yeah, it builds that trust element. So that's really great. So when let's do a quick review of the term gut health. Like that term is everywhere. Can you just do a quick definition or summary on what that means?
Yeah, so it's a big term right now. It's become so trendy in the last like 5 years, especially on social media. So the gut is like a short form term for the gastrointestinal tract, which is our entire digestive tract, all the way from our mouth to the other end, our anus in specific terms. So it's the whole connection, like the whole way through. And then gut health is sort of a broad term. Like, I don't think there's one like specific definition, but there are some different ways that we can sort of explain it. So one is like looking at the gut microbiome and what makes like a healthy gut microbiome. So we know that like a lot of diversity and a richness of different species in our microbiome, and ideally more of the good and less of the bad or the pathogenic bacteria make a healthy gut microbiome, which supports a healthy gut. And then also different signs and symptoms. So a healthy gut should be like absence of disease, so things like Crohn's disease or cancer, colon cancer, and then looking at our different symptoms. So we want to have, signs that we have a healthy gut, or perhaps good quality daily bowel movements. We want to aim for that type 3-4 in the Bristol stool chart. Have normal bloating and distension most of the time after meals. A normal amount of like gas and wind, so it is normal to like fart 5 to 15 times a day. More than that, if it's painful, maybe a sign that something's a bit off.
Wait,
and
how many times are normal?
5 to 15.
Okay, noted. That is really good to know. I'm gonna tell everyone that.
In case anyone wants to count it.
I'm sure a lot of that happens when you're sleeping, right?
No, probably more so throughout the day, because once you're moving, that like supports gas clearance when you're kind of walking around and doing movement during the day. So your digestion's also like our digestive tract works on more of a diurnal pattern, so it's more active in the daytime. So that's when most of the digestive is happening rather than at nighttime. So probably we'll be excreting a bit more gas during the day.
Interesting. So if someone that could be my boyfriend, might not be, is farting a lot middle of the night, is that an issue? He's gonna kill me for saying that.
That is kind of funny. Yeah. It's probably, I wonder, maybe he's just a little bit more quiet about it during the day, but there's nothing holding him back at nighttime.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. You guys are getting some comedy today.
Yeah.
Oh my
Probably
God.
what they had for dinner.
Of course. So let's do a quick anatomy lesson. So can you take us through the process of digestion from where it starts with just eating food, going into the mouth, and then how it ends up being excreted through our stool?
Yeah, I can try to go through that the best I can. So digestion starts in the mouth. We have teeth, which help to break down our food. That's why we want to chew. Chewing is very important, something I talk about a lot with clients. And some people don't pay attention to chewing enough, so we definitely want to make sure we chew. We also have our saliva that gets excreted in our mouth, and it contains different enzymes that start to break down like the components and the macronutrients in our food. So our food really starts, or our digestion starts in the mouth. Then it moves down our esophagus, which is like a tube that connects our mouth to our stomach. It moves through something called peristalsis, which you might have heard of. We talked about like the movement in the intestinal tract. So it moves down our esophagus, and then it enters our stomach. And then our stomach has got quite a lot of like muscles in it. So it sort of works to like grind and like break down our food even more. And then we have a lot of like acids in our stomach, which also help to further break down our food. I did want to show, I had this picture for you as well. I'm going to share my screen here too, just to show kind of some of the nutrients.
For the people who are watching on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll try to explain too. Actually, how do I share my screen?
I might need to give you access. Hold on.
Oh, I think that's why.
Let me make you the host. All right, go ahead.
Oh. Okay. Sorry, technical issue.
We're fine.
This is supposed to be at the bottom. I still don't see it. It says like pause, stop recording.
You don't see it at the bottom?
No, it didn't pop up.
That's weird, because you are officially the host.
Oh, really? Security, participants, chat, stop recording, show captions.
It says I can share screen. That's so weird.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll leave it then.
All right.
You can edit that part out.
Can you make me the host again just before I forget?
Okay. Yeah, so foods in our stomach, we do actually like absorb some minerals. We absorb water in our stomach, but most of the like nutrient absorption happens in our small and large intestine. So after foods in the stomach, it moves through into our small intestine. So the first part is called the duodenum or duodenum, whichever way you pronounce it. And that's where a lot of absorptions of different nutrients occur. So we have like all of our B vitamins, things like zinc, magnesium, calcium, folate, vitamin A, D, E, K. So a lot of like our nutrients are absorbed there. After that part, it moves into the second part of the small intestine, the jejunum, which is more of our fats and amino acids are broken down. And then the last part is called the ileum. And then some things like vitamin B12, vitamin C are also absorbed there too. After that, it moves into our large intestine or large bowel, where it's broken down even further. This is where the fermentation occurs. So in most people, most of our microbiome and like our gut bacteria reside in our large bowel. Ideally, there shouldn't be much in the small bowel. If there were more, that's when we get into things like SIBO that I know you've talked about before on here. So most of our microbiome is resonating in our large intestine. So that's where we get that sort of fermentation, and things like our fiber and our prebiotics are broken down by those fermentable bacteria in our large bowel. So once it moves through there, then the next step is, sort of got in a little bit of a holding pattern there, and then we're ready to excrete it. Then we have a bowel movement. So ideally, I think the sort of Gastrointestinal Association's definition of a normal bowel movement frequency is 3 times a day to 3 times a week. I'm not sure about you. Ideally, I like to see my clients like aiming to go once a day or twice a day just to help keep things moving. But yeah, it is thought to be normal to have a bowel movement up to 3 times a week, or as minimal as 3 times a week is considered normal.
Interesting. And earlier you mentioned the Bristol stool chart. And so I just wanted, if anybody listening has never heard of it, definitely Google it. Unless you're driving, Google it later. Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, so the Bristol stool chart is it's a chart of different bowel movements working on a scale of 1 to 7. So ideally what it tells us is different things to look for in terms of like the shape and the consistency of our bowel movements to know whether they are normal or whether there is something maybe lacking in our diet. So ideally we want to be a type 3 or 4 on the Bristol stool chart. Type 4 is like considered a long snake shape, but it should be compact and like hold its shape. And then type 3, I think, is considered like sort of a sausage with some cracks on the surface, but again, it should keep its shape. If we're really high on the scale, so type 6 or 7, that's when we have really more unformed stool, loose stool, aka diarrhea. And then type 1, Type 2 is more so on the constipation side. So type 1 is like those hard little pebbles. And then type 2 is a bit more dry, a little bit more formed, but still sort of a small, inadequate bowel movement. So it's a good way to check. Like, most people don't really look at their bowel movements or think it's kind of funny or taboo to check, but it is a good thing to look at, and it can really indicate what's going on with your digestion and maybe some areas that you need to think about if things don't look normal. So I always recommend to keep it on hand.
Yeah. I'd say it's probably not weird for this audience because we're used to looking at our pee. So
right.
the other thing coming out of your body. So start
Yeah.
paying attention to what that looks like, compare it to the Bristol stool chart and see where you're at. If you're not at a 3 or a 4, then maybe we need to do some investigating.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. That's great that there is a chart out there like that to help people understand what's, quote unquote normal, because I'm sure we've all been at various stages in that scale before, and there's a lot of things that can impact it. I mean, what you're eating, your hydration, exercise, things like that. So there's a lot of
Definitely
factors.
Yeah, I think it's good to remember, just because I do, I work mostly with IBS. Sometimes we tend to focus maybe a little bit too much on the bowel movements, and we're always searching for that perfect poop every day. So it's good to remember that there can be some normal fluctuations. So ideally that type 3, 4, I think 95% of the time is what we're aiming for. It is normal to maybe once in a while have some fluctuation, just depending what we eat or a little bit of stress or travel. But ideally, most of the time, we want to aim for that 3, 4. It's always good to be, I think, realistic too in our health. We're not aiming for perfection, kind of aiming for that right balance.
Yeah, something that I saw 2 different physical therapists post about recently which was so interesting to me, was there's a window of time where you start to get that urge, and you have I don't know, 20-ish minutes to have a bowel movement, and that urge can go away if you wait too long. And that is actually something that I've experienced before and can relate to, because if you're busy doing stuff and you ignore that urge and that urge goes away, you can end up getting constipated, and that can make things worse. Is this an actual, what is that called? Is there a name? Something window, I think they were saying.
I don't know. I'm not sure, actually. I haven't heard a specific.
I'll have to go back and look at those posts and see what they were calling it, because I was so fascinated by that.
Yeah. I need to look at Alaska on a map and the term for bowel movement.
Bowel movement urge window.
I'm not sure. I haven't heard a specific term. Yeah, I would say that is true. I do for people with more diarrhea type IBS, they tend to get a lot of urgency. So I think that's often hard to push off. They really need to make it to the bathroom right away, or they're probably not going to make it. But yeah, it's especially important for people who do even struggle with constipation, that we really need to honor that time when it happens and really make sure that is taken care of, because
the longer it sits there, your bowel is going to keep drawing water out of it, right? And it'll get hard.
Exactly. Yeah. So going back to the digestion, most of our water is absorbed in the large bowel. So if it sits there longer, it's gonna lose more water over time. And it's gonna be even harder to pass and more painful, which is not good.
And turn into a rock. No one wants to poop a rock.
No. And you have risk of getting hemorrhoids and fissures, which are not fun either.
Not funny yet. Here we are laughing.
Not fun or funny.
So what is there a normal digestion time from when you eat something to when it gets digested, and excreted? Is there a time range for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's actually a pretty big range. The normal range is considered about 24 to 72 hours. So 1 to 3 days. The time that food moves through can also depend on what you eat. So foods like that are higher in protein and fats, like your meat and fish, they're gonna take more time to digest just because it takes more to like break down the protein and fat molecules. But foods like fruits and vegetables, which are mainly like fiber and water, they can be digested a lot more quickly. So they can move out of you within like a day or a little bit under 24 hours as well. So it does depend like on what you eat. And then of course, like your anything underlying that's going on, stress, medications, medical conditions can always influence that time pattern. But yeah, it is normal for food to take up to 3 days to move through.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because we have a lot of, or I get a lot of questions about when somebody with interstitial cystitis eats a trigger food or beverage, you know, what's the onset time of when a flare presents, and like what is the maximum amount of time it can take for that flare to present? And I usually go from, I usually say anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 days. And that 3 days is basically from how long you just said it can take to digest something.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what is the cause of the flare, or why is it a trigger? Like, is it an allergy, or is it an intolerance?
Right.
Yeah, it really depends.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that play into it, but
yeah,
that's a whole other conversation. So in terms of key nutrients and foods for gut health, like what are those items that people want to include more of in their diet?
Yeah, so I like to talk about a term called micro accessible carbohydrates, or MACs. So ideally in our diet, we want to be getting a good amount of these types of carbohydrates that are essentially, we don't break them down, like our body doesn't break them down. They're resistant to human digestion, but our gut bacteria break them down, and they create beneficial chemicals and compounds that help to support the health of our intestinal tract and our gut. So examples of like MACs, I'm not sure if you've talked about this on the podcast before, but I'll
of this before.
No. Okay, cool. Yeah, so many types of MACs are considered like prebiotics, meaning they have like beneficial compounds or benefits when we break them down. So there's a few here in terms of examples. I want to look back at my notes. Yeah, so some examples of MACs would be resistant starches, which is a type of starch. We don't necessarily break it down, but our gut bacteria use it as fuel. It's found in things like raw oatmeal, or any carbs that's been like cooked and cooled, so like leftover rice or potatoes. Inulin, which I know is common trigger for IBS. I'm not sure if it is in IC as well, but it's very fermentable. Does actually offer like a lot of good benefits for our gut bacteria, but it can cause some gas and distension in those that are a bit more sensitive. So it's found in things like our garlic, onion, artichokes, asparagus. Pectins are another type of MAC, so that's found in like our apples, oranges, blueberries. And then the other one is beta-glucans. So that's actually found in mushrooms and algae. So these are different types of, again, carbohydrates that our bacteria, our microbiota, can access and essentially break down and use as fuel, and then produce beneficial compounds that help support the health of our gut. Other foods that I like to talk about with gut health would be our fermented foods. So foods that have been, processed by fermentation. So our kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut. You can also get fermented like beets, carrots, and pickles. And then also our fermented soy. So natto, which is like fermented soybeans, also tempeh and miso would be in that category too. And then, of course, we want to talk about fiber. So we need to get enough fiber to support a healthy digestive tract. Lots of types of fiber are MACs, though not all fiber is considered a micro-accessible carb. So we do want to get a balance of that. For women, we want to get at least 25 grams of fiber, and then men at least 35 grams a day. Really important. And then I'll mention like a few micronutrients for gut health too. So We talk about potassium, because that's a nutrient not a lot of people tend to get enough of. I think maybe only 30–40% of North Americans get enough potassium, so it's definitely underconsumed. But it plays a role in like muscle contraction, so it affects like our gut motility and how food moves through our gut. So we want to get enough potassium. We get it from things like bananas, leafy greens, avocado, sweet potato, and potatoes. And then vitamin C as well is also important for the gut. So we get that from like our colorful fruits and veggies. So
And
lots of plant foods.
yes,
As you
and
can
unfortunately, a lot of the foods you just said are on the most bothersome trigger or foods list of the IC diet. And that's where I think a lot of people with IC are struggling. And I truly believe so many people have nutrient deficiencies that may not be known to them.
Yeah.
And I also don't think that many people are sensitive to some of these items. Like, I mean, soy is a pretty, I would say that is one of the more common triggers, at least for people with IC, but it's these fermented foods that fascinate me. And I've always wanted to see more research done on, the benefits versus the risks of consuming fermented foods, like the ones you mentioned. Because sometimes I feel like they will benefit people more than they'll hurt people, but everyone is just so different, and that's where it gets complex. And then, talking about vitamin C, I mean, that is a typical trigger for people with IC. However, there are certain foods that aren't common irritants for the bladder. Things like blueberries, for example, that's one. Bell peppers, those colorful fruits and veggies. And a lot of people with IC are just afraid to eat anything that is labeled as having vitamin C. And then, you can get all these nutrient deficiencies, and that's where things just get really complicated. I know I just said that, but I'm thinking like we know that about a third of people with IC also have IBS, and there's a lot of people with IC complaining about other GI issues like bloating. I mean, maybe they're not consuming enough of these MACs that you're talking about, and maybe their gut is being impacted, and that can in turn impact their bladder.
Yeah, so get into that a bit more when we talk about the role of the gut and inflammation. But I want to go back to what you said about the fermented foods. So with because I know with IBS there's some fermented foods that can be high FODMAP, that can contain like garlic and onions and things like cabbage that can cause some symptoms for those that have FODMAP intolerances. But in IC, is it the fermentable carbs that bother people, or is it more the histamine because they're fermented? Like, do you know what tends to be the more common?
We really don't know for sure. I do think histamine is an issue for many people. And isn't the process of fermenting, I've never fermented anything, but isn't it utilizing like vinegar?
So actually, that's a good point. So pickled foods are ones that are aged in vinegar, but you actually lose more of the live microbes when you pickle things. Versus traditionally fermented, or the ones that I encourage like people to have, like our kimchi and our sauerkraut, should be fermented in brine, so in salt and water. And
Okay.
that preserve more of the compounds. Yeah. So ideally, if you're having those like raw fermented veggies, you want to look for something unpasteurized, not heat treated, and then it should be made with salt and water, not contain any vinegar.
Yeah. So vinegar is a big trigger. So yeah, definitely avoiding that, I think, for people that are sensitive to vinegar. But yeah, I think if someone's listening and they are interested in trying some of these things, like, yeah, looking for those items that are fermented with the brine, I think would be a great place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. I even get clients, because they can have like a third cup of kimchi is low FODMAP friendly. like for my IBS clients, or if you're doing a kefir, traditionally it is dairy based. I'm not sure if that tends to be a trigger for IC, but you can get like a coconut milk kefir if someone wants to avoid dairy, and it'll have the similar like fermented food benefits. And then I find tempeh tends to be a lot better digested or sort of tolerated than things like soft tofu or just regular tofu as well. So there's lots of different options. I think it's good to kind of maybe explore different types and see. But even going back to all that, like you mentioned, the avoidance of food and sort of being scared of many foods, that's why it's so important to work with a dietitian who can really help you look at your diet and help you to expand more and add more foods into your diet. Because if you're eating less and you're restricting, you're going to be more likely to have nutrient deficiencies, and that's probably going to make your symptoms worse. So restriction is not the answer, and not doing it blindly for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was there anything else in any of the long tangent I just went on that you wanted to dive into before we go switch gears to pre and postbiotic or pre and probiotic?
Yeah. I wanted to ask, when you said vitamin C was a trigger, do you mean like types of foods, or did you mean the actual like?
So yeah, so in terms of food, citrus is a big one.
Okay. So you mean more like citrus fruits or acidic?
Yeah, acidic items, supplements as well. There's a certain form that is better. I always get the forms mixed up, and I don't want to screw it up on this podcast right now. There's a form that is better tolerated. Of course, I'm gonna have to look it up. Better tolerated. There's some supplements like people are recommended to do like a low acid vitamin C or multivitamin. It is one of the more bothersome items for people with IC.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't really ever recommend like vitamin C supplements, just because there are so many food sources. And yeah, thinking of avoiding like the more acidic fruits, I would say like in blueberries, strawberries are a really good source. Any of your leafy greens, spinach, kale, collards. If mango is okay, that's a really good source. And yeah, bell peppers too. So even just having, I think, at least like 2-3 different colors a day does give someone a good amount of vitamin C, probably enough to meet their needs. So
right. So calcium ascorbate is anecdotally better tolerated than ascorbic acid, I believe, is the other form.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And some of the IC friendly sources of vitamin C would be red, orange, yellow bell peppers, potatoes, kale, blueberries, pumpkin. So that's a pretty good amount of things.
Yeah, that's a good amount. Yeah, for sure. I forgot about potatoes. Yeah, those are a good source.
So
the humble potato.
Yeah, obviously more research is still needed on diet for IC, but for now, this is what we're working with. And there is a big fear factor when it comes to certain foods, and getting those nutrients is difficult. And then people will try to, do a multivitamin for insurance purposes. I kind of say it like that because it's like you're covering all your bases with a multivitamin. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to that. So
yeah.
Do
you want to move on to the?
Yeah, I think a big or a hot topic in just normal people world, as well as the IC community, and I'm sure the IBS community, is pre and post. I keep saying pre and post, and I mean to say pre and probiotics. You're also going to dive into postbiotics, but I get a lot of questions about these things and whether people need them, do they not need them. So can you dive into what those things are and whether or not people need them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So prebiotics are essentially like the fuel for our gut bacteria. They break them down, they produce beneficial compounds, and it helps them to like survive and thrive. A prebiotic also should have a conferred or like a studied health benefit in the body. So when I was going back to those MACs, not all MACs are considered prebiotics because not all of them have considered like health benefits necessarily. So that's an important part to remember. But we do definitely want to have prebiotics in our diet, like I mentioned, because of those, they provide that fuel for our gut bacteria and they help them to flourish. And that helps to prevent sort of dysbiosis, which is where there's an imbalance of good and bad gut bacteria. And we tend to get an overgrowth of pathogenic when we don't give our good bacteria enough of the right fuel sources or enough prebiotics to survive and thrive. So some examples of like prebiotic foods would be our nuts and seeds. Also those like inulin sources. So things like green banana is a good source, or asparagus, artichokes, like fresh or canned are fine. And also asparagus, good source. And then even things like apples or berries, good source of prebiotics. I tend to use like prebiotic supplements sometimes in practice. So I'll use something called PHGG, or partially hydrolyzed guar gum. I don't know if you've heard of it before.
Nope.
No. Okay. So here it's called, in Canada, it's called Fiber 4 is our most common product. In the States, it's called Sun Fiber is like the common name. But it has been shown to have a very strong like prebiotic effect, and it can help with rebalancing microbiome. It's really good at helping regulate bowel movement. So if someone's been struggling with constipation or diarrhea, it helps to kind of bring it into the middle and give them more of those type 3, 4 benefits. And as I mentioned, it's low FODMAP friendly, so it's a very well tolerated like prebiotic. Fiber 2 doesn't cause much gas or distension. So we want prebiotics in our diet. Probiotics are the actual like microorganisms themselves that again have been shown to have like a health benefit when consumed or either applied on the body. So you can find probiotics in different forms. So there's either probiotic foods, which are specifically labeled as being probiotic foods. There's body products that contain probiotics, and then of course there's supplements, so like our powders or our capsule probiotics. I think people tend to think of like fermented foods as always being probiotic foods, but not all fermented foods are actually probiotic foods. Fermented foods do have their own benefit, like they contain some live cultures, and they also contain post-biotics, which we'll get into, but only like a few select foods are actually considered a probiotic food. So only probiotic yogurt and probiotic kefir are actually probiotic foods. So essentially it's different types of probiotics. Again, it like depends on what the research has shown to be their health benefit. So there's different types of strains or different combinations of strains of like bacteria and microorganisms that we might take to help with a certain benefit. I like to use something called the Probiotic chart. I think it's a Canadian website, but it actually lists like different health conditions and then what specific strain or like combination of strains can help in a certain condition, and then the research papers to back it up. So I'm very selective about, I'm not sure if you have something similar, if you've heard of it.
I have no idea. I feel like I've looked at something like that, but I don't know where I was when I looked. But probiotic strains just make my head spin. So I'm really glad that there is a resource like that.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I'll send it to you after. I don't know if you want to link it.
Yeah.
Link it here, but I think that's the important part too, is that like so many people hear, one of the best things you can do for your gut health is take a probiotic. So they'll just go to the store and they'll buy anything off the shelf with whatever claim on it sounds like something that they need. But I would say like a lot of the supplements that are probiotic out there aren't even actually probiotics because they might not have good research behind them. And then I think like someone needs to be very specific on what they're taking for why they're taking it. It's kind of like medication. Like you wouldn't just take any medication to help with something like cholesterol. Like you'd want to make sure it's a specific type of medication that's helped with that. I'm just using that as an example. So same thing with probiotics. Like we want to make sure what we're taking is right for our goals. Because if not, it can actually make things worse, or essentially we're just wasting our money because it can be quite expensive too. Does that make sense? We got the pre and the pro biotics down. Okay. So then we get into the post-biotics. So postbiotics are essentially the leftover, the byproduct of microorganism like fermentation. So when those probiotics, the good bacteria, break down the fuel, the prebiotics, then we're left with postbiotics. So some of our bacteria in our gut actually break down, they produce nutrients. So they can produce things like vitamin K. So vitamin K in our gut, made in our gut, is actually a postbiotic. When we consume like fermented foods, we get some of the postbiotics because the bacteria in the fermentation process produce different chemicals that are actually shown to have some health benefits, help reduce inflammation, and they're considered like postbiotics. So when we consume them, we get some of those. And then there's a few other nutrients. I think there's one of the B vitamins, I can't remember, that's also a postbiotic. I'm not sure which B vitamin, but some of them. So our gut bacteria helps that break that down. And then also I mentioned the short chain fatty acids. So some bacteria in our large bowel break down those MACs, and then they produce things called short chain fatty acids, which actually help to sort of modulate the environment in our intestinal tract, and they help to regulate and reduce inflammation. So they can help reduce inflammation at the gut layer or the intestinal layer as well. So yeah, so that would be essentially our postbiotics, which is becoming more of a trendy term too.
Yeah. So, I mean, not everybody needs to be taking like a probiotic supplement or anything like that. Like you can get enough from food. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah. So that's pretty much my stance on it. Like I always get annoyed when I see things on social media where they're like, oh, the best thing you can do for your gut health is take a probiotic. No, that is not true. Essentially, if for most people, most healthy people, like we can consume things that help our gut bacteria to survive and thrive and like produce the best environment. So getting things like the fiber and the fermented foods and those MACs, that we probably don't need to take like a specific probiotic supplement for most people. Yeah, so I'd rather focus on that food approach, the prebiotics.
I mean, and the same thing can be said about vitamins and minerals. I mean, always try to get it from the food source. And then if you're falling short, then discuss a supplement. I mean, there's just so much that we can consume out there. And even if you have restrictions like in IC or IBS, like there are still ways for you to get enough of these nutrients. Like there are like, for example, vitamin C sources that are bladder friendly that I listed. Like there are ways, you just need to put a little bit more thought and planning into it. And, you know, that's always like the better approach than just grabbing a probiotic or whatever it is that you're going to grab. So
for sure. And we get so many different benefits from like whole foods. Like we get prebiotics from plant foods. We also get different nutrients and a whole spectrum of different things versus just relying on a supplement which just has that specific component in it. So yeah, it's important to remember. So bottom line, don't waste your money just on probiotics. Focus on the other things.
These conditions are expensive enough as it is. So save your money.
And don't fall for supplement marketing. The supplement world is a wild, wild west. It's just so many.
Absolutely not regulated in the United States. I don't know about Canada.
Yeah, I mean it is. I would say like moderately regulated, but not necessarily always the marketing claims.
Right. Is there anything else on this topic that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I don't know if I had any other notes. Yeah, on the probiotics, pre-pro. No, I think kind of covered. Yeah.
I covered it all. Okay, perfect. So in wrapping this up, if somebody is struggling with GI issues, gut health issues, and they want to see a gut health dietitian, you know, what is working with one or specifically you? What would that look like?
Yeah, so I think, even just going back to what I was saying, social media, there's so much information out there that I think people are just so overwhelmed with information that they're confused, and it oftentimes kind of leads us to like paralysis in terms of what to do to help our conditions. So I think like as dietitians, I know in the States, it's the same. We're the only regulated health professional when it comes to nutrition. So we, work with clients in a high level of standard, and we always practice with evidence-based care. So in terms of like, working with a dietitian one-on-one, that's really the best way to get on a personalized plan and find out what's going to work for you, and also how to do it in a way that's, proven and supported by evidence, rather than just sort of, guessing in the dark or following fad claims. So I dive pretty deep with my one-on-one clients. I always get them to complete a pretty detailed gut and food journal before. Sorry. So they always log their symptoms for at least 7 days, and then log their food in detail. Send me any blood work before our forms, and then I have a pretty detailed intake form. And then we hold like a pretty detailed initial assessment, go through their medical history, digestive health history, diet, lifestyle, all that, and then discuss, what's maybe contributing to their symptoms, and develop some nutrition goals to start. Always provide my clients with a personalized plan, any resources as well. And then we always have follow-ups where we check in and review how things are going with their goals, and layer on action steps to their plan as well. I also, because I do focus on IBS and gut health, have my signature program. So it's my Gut Harmony Method program. Clients also have access to like online program portal, where I take them through foundations of, a gut healthy lifestyle, how to do the low FODMAP diet properly, how to support their gut-brain connection, how to support their liver health. So they really get the full picture when it comes to supporting their gut health from A to Z, and taking them on that journey, because of course it takes time. So it won't happen overnight, but it does take time. And I tend to work with most of my clients for at least 4 to 6 months, if not longer, and really making sure we're building on those changes, and also setting up sustainable habits and strategies for the long term as well. So it's a process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can you work with people outside of Canada?
Yeah, so I do work with some clients in the States, and then I have some in Australia as well. Yeah.
Are you currently accepting new clients?
I am accepting some for next month, so for the end of June. Usually tend to book about a month in advance, but I am accepting.
Perfect. So how can somebody get in contact with you or follow you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Leigh Merotto _RD. I've got some freebies on my website if they just want to get started with some free information and learn a little bit more about my approach and philosophy. So it's leighmerotto.com. And if they do want to work with me for one-on-one coaching, I have an application form on my website. Just apply so I can get some background from you, and then we'd set up a free 30-minute clarity call for us to chat, see what your goals are, what you've been struggling with, and then if my program would be a right fit for you. So I always hold those calls first for anyone who's interested in working together to make sure it's the right fit for both of us.
Perfect. Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting about the gut, making fun of my boyfriend, and talking about probiotics with me. It's been fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I'm glad we went through a lot of cool topics there, and yeah, I love talking about it. So anytime.
All right. So you are gonna have to end the recording. I didn't realize I wasn't the host.
Oh, okay. I'll stop recording. Okay.
It's a good thing I have an editor.